Something in your life feels like it is quietly falling apart right now. And the hardest part is that you often cannot explain it to anyone, because from the outside, nothing looks wrong. But I want to tell you something in the very first minute of this, before we go anywhere else, because I think you need to hear it tonight. What feels like your life falling apart may not be that at all. It may be the strange, hidden beginning of your life finally coming together. Stay with me, and by the end you are going to understand the difference. And you may never fear these seasons the same way again. Because this is one of the strangest patterns in a human life. Have you ever lived through a stretch of time that felt, while you were inside it, like everything was collapsing, only to look back years later and realize those were the very months that were quietly putting you back together? A door closed, and it broke your heart at the time, and later you understood it was that closing that saved you from a life that was never yours. A plan fell apart, and you grieved it, and later you saw the collapse was the beginning of the only path that could have led you here. The moment that feels like losing your way is so often seen from far enough away, the exact moment you were being guided home. Carl Jung spent his life studying this. He came to believe that a human being does not live only on the surface, in the events we can see and touch, but also in a deeper current beneath them, where the soul is quietly arranging things, reflecting things back to us, guiding us through layers of ourselves we are not yet aware of. And from that deeper place, what looks on the surface like chaos is often simply an order that has not revealed itself yet. What feels like delay is often a season of preparation that the conscious mind cannot yet understand. The confusion is not the opposite of the meaning. It is the meaning, still forming, still underground, not yet ready to be seen. And I want to say something to you directly, tonight, before we go any further. If you are in one of those stretches right now, if life feels empty in a way you cannot explain, or strangely silent, or like everyone else is moving forward while you stand still, I do not want to hand you shallow reassurance. I do not want to tell you to simply think positive and it will pass. What I want to do instead is something Jung would have done. I want to look with you, honestly and closely, at the empty spaces, the strange signs, the delays, the parts of yourself you have rejected, and the quiet turning points, and show you the deeper order that is very likely moving underneath all of it. Because when you can actually see that order, the fear begins to loosen on its own. You do not have to force yourself to feel better. You begin to understand, and understanding is where the peace comes from. Here is what almost no one tells you about transformation. It almost never feels like transformation while you are living through it. It feels like confusion. It feels like waiting. It feels like watching everyone else move ahead while your own life sits frozen in place and wondering, quietly, whether life has simply forgotten you. Jung understood that before a person discovers who they truly are, the identity they have been holding onto usually has to come apart first. And from the inside, the coming apart of an old self feels almost exactly like the ending of everything. The ego reads it as failure. The deeper self knows it as preparation. And this is the tragedy Jung saw so clearly. This is precisely why so many people give up and turn back at the very moment that everything was about to change. And maybe the loneliest part of it is that no one around you seems to understand. From the outside, your life looks fine. There is nothing you can point to, no single catastrophe that explains the ache. And so when you try to describe it, the words come out sounding like ingratitude, or like you are making something out of nothing. My life is good and I feel empty. I have what I wanted and none of it moves me. Nothing is wrong and everything feels wrong. It sounds like nonsense even to you. And so you stop trying to explain it, and you carry it quietly, alone, half convinced that the problem is simply you, that everyone else has figured out something you somehow missed. I want you to hear, before we go one step further, that you have not missed anything. And the problem is not that you are broken. You are in a passage that almost every person who ever became fully themselves had to cross, and had to cross as you are crossing it, mostly in silence. So tonight I want to walk with you through 8 signs that your life is quietly coming together, even though, from where you stand, it may look like it is doing the opposite. 8 strange, unsettling, easily misread signals that appear right before the pieces begin to connect. Some of them are almost certainly happening to you already, and you have been reading them as bad news. And the 8th is the one that ties all the others together. The moment you turn around and finally see what the whole long journey was for. Stay with me all the way to the end, because I think by the time we finish, the thing that has been frightening you is going to look different. It may not be the sign that your life is falling apart at all. It may be the first evidence that everything is, at long last, about to come together for you. The first sign is the emptiness, and it is usually the one that frightens people most, because it arrives without any obvious reason. From the outside, nothing is wrong. You may have the job, the relationships, the routine you spent years building, and yet one day you notice that none of it moves you the way it used to. The things that once excited you feel flat. The goals that once pulled you forward feel strangely hollow, as if they belonged to someone else. You go through your days doing everything you are supposed to do, and underneath it all there is a quiet, spreading emptiness. A sense that something essential has drained out of a life that still looks full on the surface. And because you cannot point to a single thing that has gone wrong, you begin to wonder if something is wrong with you. Almost everyone misreads this moment. They panic at the emptiness and rush to fill it. They chase a new goal, a new relationship, a new purchase, a new distraction, anything to make the hollow feeling go away. But Carl Jung understood this emptiness completely differently. He saw that when the things that used to give your life meaning suddenly stop working, it is very often not a sign of something breaking, but a sign of something ending that was always meant to end. The meaning has not disappeared from the world. It has withdrawn from a particular set of things because you have outgrown them, and the emptiness you feel is the space it leaves behind as it prepares to reattach to something truer. Think of what happens in the natural world before something new can grow. The field has to lie fallow. The tree has to drop everything it is carrying and stand bare through the winter. To a passing eye, the bare tree in January looks dead, finished, empty. But underground, in the dark, the most important work of the entire year is happening, invisibly in the roots. The emptiness is not the absence of life. It is life pulling inward to prepare for what is coming, and a human being goes through the same thing. There are seasons where the old sources of meaning fall away, and nothing new has arrived to replace them yet. And in that gap you feel hollow, wintry, strangely empty. But that emptiness is not a verdict on your life. It is a season in it. Jung had a word for what is really happening underneath this. He believed that at certain points the psyche withdraws its energy from the outer world and pulls it down into the unconscious, into the deep places where real change is made. The reason your old life suddenly feels empty is that the energy which used to animate it has been quietly recalled, pulled beneath the surface to do work you cannot see. You feel empty on the surface precisely because so much is happening below it. It is like a house where the lights suddenly dim in every room because an enormous amount of power is being routed to the basement, where something is being built. And here is the part that matters most. The emptiness is not asking you to fill it. It is asking you to let it be empty a little longer. If you rush to stuff the hollow feeling with the first distraction you can find, you interrupt the very process that is trying to renew you. You pour concrete over ground that was being cleared for something better. But if you can bear to sit in the emptiness without panicking, without immediately trying to fix it, you give the deeper work the room it needs to finish. The emptiness is not your enemy. It is the clearing before the building. It is the quiet that comes before you can finally hear what your life has been trying to tell you. So when everything suddenly feels empty, do not assume the worst. Something in you is making room, and what it is making room for is the first sign that your life is beginning, quietly, to come together. History is full of people who arrived at everything they thought they wanted and were ambushed by exactly this emptiness. Consider Leo Tolstoy, who by his 50s had written some of the greatest novels ever composed, had wealth, fame, a large family, health, and the admiration of the world. By every external measure, his life was complete, and yet he was overtaken by a hollowness so total that he later wrote, he had to hide the rope from himself so he would not use it, and put away his hunting guns, because a man who seemingly had everything found that none of it answered the one question that had risen up from the emptiness inside him. What is the meaning of it? His crisis was not a sign that his life had failed. It was the sign that his old way of finding meaning, in achievement, in reputation, in the good opinion of others, had reached the end of what it could give him, and something deeper in him was demanding a truer foundation. Out of that terrible emptiness came the most profound spiritual searching of his entire life. That is what Jung wanted us to understand about the empty seasons. They are not the failure of a life. They are very often the failure of a particular set of answers that has simply been outgrown. And the emptiness is the space that opens when those old answers fall away and the truer ones have not yet arrived. It is uncomfortable precisely because it is honest. The hollowness is telling you that you have come to the end of something, and that you cannot go back to pretending the old sources still satisfy you. That is not a small thing, and it is not a failure. It is the beginning of a deeper search, and the fact that it hurts is a measure of how real it is. And once you have felt that emptiness, you begin to notice the second strange thing, the aching sense that no matter what you do, you are always somehow arriving too late. The second sign is the feeling that you are always behind, that everyone else got there first, and you are perpetually arriving too late to your own life. You look around and it seems as though the people your age have already arrived somewhere you have not. They have the settled career, the marriage, the house, the family, the certainty, and you are still figuring it out, still starting over, still standing at a beginning while they stand at a milestone. And it produces a very particular kind of ache. Not just sadness, but a sense of shame, as if your timing itself is proof that something is wrong with you, as if there was a schedule everyone else received and you somehow missed. You feel like a runner who looks up mid-race to find the whole field already crossing the finish line, and something in you quietly concludes that you have failed. But Carl Jung would look at this feeling and gently take it apart, because it rests on an assumption that is simply not true. The assumption is that there is a single correct timeline for a human life, and that falling behind it means failing. Jung understood that the process of becoming who you actually are, what he called individuation, does not run on a public schedule at all. It runs on its own deep, inner clock, and that clock is different for every single person. Some people bloom early and easily along the paths their society laid out for them. And some people are being prepared, slowly and painfully, for a life that could not have arrived any sooner, because they were not yet ready to hold it. Consider what being early actually means, and what it costs. Many of the people who seem to have arrived so far ahead of you arrived by taking the well-marked road, the one everyone agrees on, the safe and conventional path. And for a great many of them, there comes a day, often in the middle of life, when they wake up inside all that early success and realize they built it on someone else's blueprint, that they never asked whether they actually wanted it, that they arrived on schedule at a destination that was never truly theirs. Arriving early is only a blessing if you were traveling toward the right place. If you were on the wrong road, arriving early just means you got to the wrong life faster. Jung believed that the detours, the false starts, the long, confusing delays are not wasted time at all. They are often the psyche refusing to let you commit prematurely to a life that would not fit you. Every time a door closed that you desperately wanted to walk through, every time you were passed over, held back, made to wait, it is worth asking whether something in you, deeper than your conscious wishes, was quietly steering you away from a path that looked good but was not yours. What felt like falling behind may have been protection. What felt like failure may have been a course correction you could not understand at the time because you could only see the delay, not the reason for it. There is an image that captures this. Imagine two seeds planted in the same garden on the same day. One sprouts within a week, fast and green and impressive, and everyone admires how quickly it grew. The other seems to do nothing for a long time. Season after season passes, and the surface shows no sign of life, and anyone watching would say that second seed had failed. But underground, that slow seed is not idle. It is sending its roots down, patiently, far deeper than the fast one ever did, building a foundation vast enough to support something the quick sprout could never become. And when its time finally comes, it does not grow into a flower that lasts a season. It grows into a tree that stands for 100 years. You were perhaps never behind. You may simply be one of the ones who is being rooted, and the rooting takes longer because what you are being built for is larger. So when the ache of arriving late rises in you, and it will, try to remember that you are comparing your inner, unfinished journey to the outer, polished surface of other people's lives, which is never a fair comparison. Their visible arrival tells you nothing about whether they reached the right place, and your invisible delay tells you nothing about whether you have failed. You are on your own clock, the deep clock of your own becoming, and that clock is not slow, it is exact. It is bringing you to yourself at precisely the pace that becoming a whole person requires. And that quiet, patient preparation is the second sign that everything is coming together underneath the surface. And look at how many lives only truly began at the age when others assumed the story was already written. There was a man who failed at business after business, who lost jobs and ventures across his whole working life, and who was living on a modest pension check in his 60s, an age when the world had already written him off, when he finally took the one recipe people genuinely loved and built it into something that would feed the world. He was past 60 when his real life began. There are painters who did not pick up a brush until their 70s, writers whose first real work came in their 50s, people whose entire visible achievement arrived in the years everyone else considered the beginning of the end. These were not people who fell behind and failed. These were people whose long, slow, apparently wasted early years were quietly assembling everything: the resilience, the perspective, the hard-won self-knowledge that their real work would eventually require, and which they simply could not have had any earlier. Jung would say their timing was not late at all. It was exact. The decades that looked, from outside and probably from inside too, like failure and delay were the root system going down, the long invisible preparation without which the later flowering could never have held. If those people had somehow arrived on schedule, forced into bloom in their 20s like everyone told them to, they would have bloomed as someone they had not yet become, and it would not have been the same thing at all. The waiting was not the enemy of their becoming. The waiting was the making of it. And the same may well be true of the years you have been mourning as lost. And as it works, you will begin to notice the third strange thing: the appearance of small, uncanny signs that seem almost aimed at you. The third sign is subtle, and you might dismiss it if you were not paying attention. Small, strange coincidences begin to appear, and they seem almost as if they were placed in your path on purpose. A name you have not thought of in years suddenly comes up 3 times in a single week. You are wrestling with a question you cannot answer, and a stranger says the exact thing you needed to hear, without any idea of what they just did. A book falls open to the right page. A song arrives at the precise moment its words mean something. You keep encountering the same image, the same idea, the same quiet nudge from unrelated directions, and the more you notice it, the louder it seems to become, until you find yourself wondering whether something is trying to get your attention. Now, I want to stay honest and grounded here, because this is exactly the place where reflection can slide into wishful thinking. and Carl Jung himself was far too careful a thinker to let it. Not every coincidence is a message. Sometimes a coincidence is only a coincidence, and a mind under strain will find patterns in pure noise. Jung knew this. And yet, as one of the most serious minds of the last century, he also observed something he could not explain away. He noticed that in the lives of people undergoing deep inner change, these meaningful coincidences cluster in a way that is genuinely striking, arriving too precisely and carrying too much personal meaning to be dismissed so easily. He gave the phenomenon a name. He called it synchronicity. Jung's insight was subtle, and it is worth understanding correctly, because the shallow version of it has been sold 1,000 times. He was not saying that the universe rearranges itself to hand you whatever you desire if you simply believe hard enough. He was saying something quieter and far more interesting. He observed that when a person reaches a certain depth of inner integration, when the long war between their conscious mind and their unconscious depths begins to settle, they start to notice meaningful connections between their inner state and outer events, connections that carry real significance even without any ordinary chain of cause and effect linking them. The coincidences may not actually be increasing. What is changing is you. You have grown quiet enough and awake enough to finally perceive a layer of meaning that was always faintly there, and that you were simply too distracted and too defended to notice before. And this is why the signs tend to begin now, in a season of emptiness and confusion, rather than in the busy, certain years. When your life was full and loud and moving fast, you had no room to notice the quiet correspondences. You walked right past them. But the emptiness has cleared a space, and the confusion has slowed you down, and in that slower, emptier state, your perception has sharpened. You are finally paying the kind of attention that these signs require. The world has not suddenly started speaking to you. You have finally become quiet enough to hear a conversation that was always going on. So when the strange little signs begin to appear, do not inflate them into magic, and do not dismiss them as nothing. Do something wiser than both. Simply pay attention. Notice them. Write them down if it helps. Let them teach you the thing they are actually there to teach, which is not that the universe will do your work for you, but that you are not, and never were, a lone and separate self, cut off, fighting a cold and indifferent world. Something in you and something in the world have quietly begun to move in relationship again. And that renewed sense of connection, that first thinning of the wall between your inner life and your outer life, is the third sign that everything is beginning to come together. The single most famous moment in all of Jung's work came from exactly this kind of coincidence. He was treating a woman whose relentless rationalism had locked her in place. She could analyze everything and change nothing, because she had walled herself off from anything she could not explain. One day, she was recounting a dream in which she had been given a piece of golden jewelry shaped like a scarab beetle, and at that very moment, Jung heard a soft tapping at the window behind him. He turned, opened it, and a real beetle flew in, a rose chafer, the closest thing his climate had to the golden scarab of her dream. He caught it in his hand and turned to her and said, "In effect, here is your scarab." The coincidence was so precise, so impossible to rationalize away, that it cracked the woman's rigid defenses open, and for the first time, real change became possible in her. Jung did not claim he had made the beetle appear. He simply observed, honestly, that the outer event and the inner state had coincided with a meaning too exact to dismiss, and that the coincidence did real psychological work. Notice what actually mattered in that story. It was not that the universe performed a trick. It was that a meaningful coincidence arrived at precisely the moment the person was ready for it, and it opened something in her that pure logic never could. That is what these signs are for. They are not there to do your living for you. They are there to crack open the part of you that had grown too closed, too defended, too certain that it was alone in an indifferent world. and to let a little wonder back in. The signs return you to relationship with your own life, and that reopening, more than any single coincidence, is the real gift. And here is how you can tell a meaningful sign from mere noise without fooling yourself, because the difference is real and worth learning. A trivial coincidence is a shrug. You notice it, and it slides off you, and it changes nothing. A meaningful one lands differently. It carries a strange weight, a quiet jolt of recognition, as if some part of you already knew it was coming. It tends to arrive at exactly the moment its meaning is ripe, in the middle of the very question you have been carrying, and it speaks directly to that question in a way that is hard to explain away. You do not have to decide in advance whether the universe is speaking. You only have to notice which coincidences carry that weight and which do not, and pay attention to the ones that do. The discernment itself is the skill, and it keeps you honest, neither dismissing everything as random nor inflating everything into destiny. Jung held both of these truths at once, and so should you. He was a scientist who refused to abandon reason, and he was also a careful observer who refused to ignore what he kept seeing. That balance is exactly right. Stay grounded. Do not build your life on signs, or hand your decisions over to coincidences, or go looking for omens in everything until the world turns into superstition. But also, do not wall yourself off so completely that you cannot feel the quiet correspondences when they come. Hold it the way Jung did, with one hand keeping you honest and the other keeping you open. That is the posture that lets the signs do their real work, which is not to make your choices for you, but to remind you that you are woven back into a living world. But before it comes together, there is often a harder passage to cross, and that is the fourth sign, a strange and cruel silence that falls over everything. The fourth sign is the hardest to sit inside, and it is the one that makes the most people give up. A deep, aching silence falls over your life, and it goes on long enough that you begin to believe you have been forgotten. This is not the gentle emptiness of the first sign. This is something lonelier. The phone stops ringing. The opportunities you were waiting for do not come. The people who used to be close drift into the distance, and the new connections you keep hoping for do not arrive. You send things out into the world, effort, love, work, prayers, and nothing comes back. The silence stretches on so long that it starts to feel personal, as if life itself has turned its face away from you, as if you have been quietly written out of the story while everyone else's continues. And in that silence, a terrible thought takes root. The thought that this is simply how it is going to be now, that you have missed your chance, that no one is coming. I want to be very careful and very honest with you here, because this is the sign that hurts the most, and it deserves more than a slogan. The silence is genuinely painful. I am not going to pretend it is secretly pleasant, or that you should be grateful for it in the moment. But Carl Jung understood something about these long silences that changes what they mean, even if it does not remove the ache of them. He observed that before a real transformation, the unconscious often withdraws a person from the noise and the company and the momentum of their old life, almost forcibly, and sets them down in a kind of solitude, not to punish them, to get them alone. Because some things can only happen to a soul in silence, and they cannot happen while the person is still surrounded by the voices, the expectations, and the distractions of the life they are leaving. Think of how many traditions across human history have understood this. The long solitary retreat, the 40 days in the wilderness, the time apart that nearly every account of deep transformation in every culture seems to require. There is a reason this image recurs everywhere. Human beings, it seems, cannot fully become themselves in the middle of the crowd. Something in the deep work of the soul requires solitude, requires the outer voices to go quiet so that a quieter, truer voice can finally be heard. The cruel silence you are enduring may be that wilderness. It feels like abandonment, but it may be the exact solitude that your becoming requires. The emptying of the room so that you can finally hear yourself think. and finally hear what your own life has been trying to tell you underneath all the noise. And notice what the silence does, even against your will. It takes away everything external you might have leaned on for a sense of worth. When the phone is silent and the approval stops coming and no one is watching or applauding, you are forced back onto the bare question of who you are when no one is affirming you. It is a brutal question, but it is also the question that builds a self that can finally stand on its own. As long as your sense of worth depended on the noise, on being needed, chosen, seen, it was fragile, borrowed, always at risk. The silence, cruel as it is quietly teaching you to find your ground somewhere the world cannot take away. It is building, in the dark, a self that does not collapse the moment the applause stops. So if you are in the silence right now, I will not tell you it does not hurt. It does. But I will tell you what it may mean, so that you can endure it without turning back. You have not been forgotten. You have been taken aside. The quiet is not the absence of your life. It is the strange, lonely, sacred room in which a truer version of your life is being prepared, out of sight, where only you and the deepest part of you are present to witness it. Do not abandon yourself in the silence. It is precisely the place where, if you can stay, you finally meet the person you were becoming all along. Carl Jung knew this silence from the inside, not merely as a theory. In his late 30s, after his painful break with Freud, he entered a period of profound isolation and disorientation that lasted for years. He lost his most important professional relationship, stepped back from much of his public life, and descended into a confrontation with his own unconscious so intense that at times he feared for his stability. It was a wilderness in every sense, lonely, silent, frightening, with no guarantee of what lay on the other side. And yet that very period, which looked from outside like a breakdown and a withdrawal from the world, was the source of nearly everything original he would later give humanity. The ideas that made him who he became were forged in that silence. Had he fled it? Had he rushed back to the noise and the reassurance of his old life? The work that helped millions of people would never have existed. He had to go into the wilderness, and he had to stay there, for the gold to be found. This is what the traditions were pointing at, with all their images of the desert and the retreat and the time apart. The silence is not empty. It only appears empty because the work it makes possible is invisible and inward. When the outer voices finally go quiet, you are forced into a relationship with yourself that the noise had always let you avoid. And in that forced solitude, a truer voice, long drowned out, can at last be heard. So, if the silence has fallen over your life, understand that you are in company you cannot see, walking a passage that nearly everyone who ever became deeply themselves had to walk. You have not been cast out. You have been taken aside into the one condition where the deepest work can finally be done. And meeting that person leads directly into the fifth sign, which turns everything you believed about your own worst qualities upside down. The fifth sign is one of the strangest and most liberating of all. You begin to discover that the very thing you have hated most about yourself has been hiding your greatest strength. For most of your life, you have probably had some part of yourself you tried to keep hidden, a quality you were ashamed of, a trait you were told, early and often, was too much or not enough. Maybe you were called too sensitive, too intense, too quiet, too strange, too emotional, too difficult. And you learned to press that part of yourself down, to hide it, to apologize for it, to see it as the flaw that would keep you from being loved and accepted. You built a whole self around avoiding it. And you came to believe that this hidden thing was simply the worst of you, the part best kept in the dark. Carl Jung gave this hidden region of the self a name. He called it the shadow, the collection of everything we have disowned and pushed out of sight, because it did not fit the image we needed to present to the world. But Jung discovered something about the shadow that almost no one expects. He found that the shadow does not only contain our darkness, it contains our buried gold. Because when we are young, we do not only exile the qualities that are genuinely destructive, we also exile the ones that frightened the people around us, or that did not fit the narrow mold we were pressed into, or that were simply too powerful for the small life we were being trained for. And so, hidden down there in the shadow, alongside the things we were right to question, is often a huge amount of our actual strength, our vitality, our originality, the very power we were made to carry, buried simply because it was inconvenient to the people who shaped us. Look closely at the thing you were shamed for, and you will very often find a strength wearing the mask of a flaw. The sensitivity you are told was weakness may be the deep empathy and perception that is your greatest gift. The intensity you are told was too much may be the passion and force that your real work requires. The stubbornness you were criticized for may be the unbreakable will that will carry you through what would stop other people. The part of you that did not fit may be precisely the part that was never meant to fit, because it was made for something the ordinary mold could not contain. What you learn to call the worst of you is, so often, the disguised form of the best of you, buried because the world around you had no place for it. There is a truth Jung pointed to that is worth sitting with. He noticed that the things which irritate and disturb us most, in ourselves and in others, are usually the doorways to the parts of us we most need to reclaim. The quality you fight hardest to keep hidden is often precisely the one carrying the energy you most need to become whole. And this is why this stage feels so liberating when it finally arrives. There comes a moment, in this long process of becoming, when you stop running from the thing you were ashamed of, and turn, at last, to face it. And when you do, you discover it was never your enemy. It was your exiled strength, waiting all these years in the dark for you to be ready to reclaim it. The homecoming of that lost part of yourself releases an enormous amount of energy that was previously spent keeping it hidden, and that returning energy is fuel for everything that comes next. So consider, gently, the possibility that the trait you have spent your life apologizing for is not the reason your life has been hard, but the key to the life that is coming. That what you were taught to bury was your gold, not your shame. Reclaiming it is not a small thing. It is one of the central acts of becoming whole. And it is the fifth sign that your life is coming together. Because a person cannot step into their real chapter while half of their strength is still exiled in the dark. You are calling your power home. There is a particular version of this worth naming, because it is one of the surest ways to find your own buried gold. Jung observed that we do not only push our darkness into the shadow, we also exile our light, our highest potential, the greatness we were too afraid or too untrained to claim, and then we go looking for it out in the world, projected onto other people. This is why you feel such a powerful pull towards certain figures, the mentors, the heroes, the people whose particular brilliance moves you almost to tears. Jung understood that we can only recognize in another what already exists, in seed form, in ourselves. The quality you most admire in someone else, the thing that lights you up when you see it in them, is not something foreign to you. It is your own disowned potential, showing you its face from the outside because you were not yet ready to find it within. So pay close attention to who you envy and who you idolize, because they are a map to your own buried gold. The specific greatness that stirs you in another person, the courage, the creativity, the freedom, the depth, is stirring precisely because it is yours, waiting, unclaimed. To worship it forever in someone else is to leave your own gold in the ground. The task of this stage is to slowly withdraw those projections, to recognize that the light you have been admiring at a distance was always a reflection of your own, and to finally begin living from the quality you once thought belonged only to your heroes. That is the reclamation of the golden shadow, and it releases some of the most important energy you will ever recover. And the moment you begin to do that, you will feel the sixth strange thing start to shift inside you. The slow turning of your fear into something that feels impossibly like strength. The sixth sign is a quiet reversal that you may only notice slowly, The fear that has followed you for so long begins, strangely, to change its nature, and instead of stopping you, it starts to become a source of strength. For most of your life, fear has probably functioned as a wall. It marked the edge of what you would attempt. When you felt it rise, you stopped, or turned back, or talked yourself out of the thing you wanted, because the fear was proof, you assumed, that you were not ready, or not able, or not meant to go further. Fear was the signal to retreat, and so you lived, as most people do, inside the borders your fear drew for you, mistaking those borders for the limits of your life. But somewhere in this long passage of becoming, something begins to shift in your relationship with fear, and Carl Jung understood the mechanism of it well. He knew that on the far side of every real threshold in a human life stands a guardian, and that guardian is fear. Not because fear is there to stop you, but because fear reliably appears at exactly the places where something important is about to happen. The size of the fear is often a measure of the size of what lies beyond it. The things that frighten us most deeply are usually the things that matter most, the thresholds that would change us if we cross them. And so fear, properly understood, stops being a wall and becomes something closer to a compass. It does not mark where your life ends. It marks where your life is trying to expand. There is an old pattern that runs through the myths of nearly every culture, and Jung studied it closely. The hero comes to the mouth of the cave, or the edge of the dark forest, or the threshold of the underworld, and there, guarding the way, is the thing they fear most. And the whole meaning of the story turns on a single fact. The treasure is always in the place the person is most afraid to go. The gold is guarded by the dragon. The new life is on the other side of the exact fear you have been avoiding. This is not a coincidence of storytelling. Jung believed these myths encode something true about the structure of the human soul. What we most need for our becoming is very often hidden precisely behind what we are most afraid of, because the fear is what has kept us from claiming it, and so that is where it waited. And as you begin to understand this, fear starts to transform in your hands. You feel it rise, as you always have. But now, instead of automatically reading it as a stop sign, you begin to read it as a signal that you are finally standing near something that matters. You start, carefully, to move towards certain fears rather than away from them, and each time you do, something extraordinary happens. The fear does not destroy you, you survive it. And on the other side of it, you find a piece of your own strength that was only ever reachable by walking through the fear that guarded it. Every fear you move through returns a portion of your power to you. And slowly, the thing that ran your life from the outside becomes something you can use, a source of information about where your growth is waiting, and even a source of energy, because there is tremendous power stored in the fears we have spent years avoiding, and it is released the moment we finally turn and face them. So watch for this reversal in yourself, because it is one of the surest signs that you are entering your real chapter. When you notice that fear no longer automatically stops you, when you feel it rise and find, underneath it, a strange steadiness and even a quiet eagerness, because you have learned that fear marks the doorway rather than the wall. When the very things that used to send you running now call to you as the places your life is trying to grow, that is the sixth sign, and it means the guardian at the threshold has become your ally. You are no longer ruled by your fear. You are being guided by it, toward exactly the thresholds you were always meant to cross. The most powerful testimony to this comes from a man who faced a darkness almost none of us will ever know. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and who lost nearly everyone he loved inside them. He walked directly into the very worst that human life can hold, the thing all of us most fear. And out of that unimaginable suffering, he drew a discovery that has since steadied millions of people. He found that even in the camps, even stripped of everything, a person retained one final freedom that could never be taken from them, the freedom to choose their own response, to find meaning even in suffering. to decide who they would be in the face of what was happening to them. The strength he brought out of that abyss was not a strength he had before he entered it. It was forged in the confrontation with the very worst, and it could not have been forged anywhere else. That is the deep truth about fear that Jung pointed to and that Frankl lived. The strength you are looking for is very often stored inside the exact thing you are most afraid to face, and the only way to reach it is to go through. We spend our lives trying to go around our fears, and so we never collect the strength that was waiting on the other side of them. But every time you turn and move through a fear instead of around it, you come out the far side carrying a piece of power that was only ever reachable by that route. The fear was never only an obstacle. It was also a container, holding the very strength that facing it would release. This is why the people who have suffered most consciously, who walked through their fear rather than fleeing it, so often carry a steadiness the rest of us can feel. They went through the guarded door, and they came back with the gold. And crossing them requires one more surrender, which is the seventh sign, the moment the ego finally stops trying to drive. The seventh sign is the deepest shift of all, and it is quiet, almost invisible from the outside. The part of you that has been frantically trying to control everything finally loosens its grip, and something wiser takes the wheel. For most of your life, the small, conscious, managing part of you, what Jung called the ego, has been in charge, and it has done its best. The ego is the part that plans, that strives, that tries to force outcomes, that lies awake at night running through every scenario, convinced that if it can just think hard enough and control enough and manage enough, it can secure your life against everything you fear. It treats life like a problem to be solved by sheer effort and vigilance. And for a while, in the building years, that frantic control serves a purpose. But there comes a point in a person's becoming where the ego's grip, which once protected you, begins instead to strangle you. Where all that trying and forcing and managing becomes the very thing standing between you and the life that wants to reach you. Carl Jung saw that the goal of the second half of life is a kind of transfer of authority inside the psyche, not the destruction of the ego, which you need, but its dethroning, its demotion from king to servant. The ego is meant, eventually, to stop believing that it is the whole of you and the master of your fate, and to take its proper place in service to something larger and deeper, what Jung called the self, the total, integrated wholeness of who you actually are, most of which lives below the surface of your awareness. And this transfer of authority almost never happens through insight alone. It usually happens through exhaustion. It happens when the ego has finally tried everything, forced everything, controlled everything it could, and hit a wall it cannot think or push its way past. And at last, out of sheer depletion, it lets go. And here is the strange grace that so many people report at exactly that moment of letting go. When the ego finally surrenders, when you finally stop frantically trying to force your life into the shape you demanded, things very often begin to move, quietly, on their own. The solution you could not think your way to arrives when you stop straining for it. The opportunity appears once you have released your desperate grip on making it happen. The peace you were chasing settles over you the moment you stop chasing it. It is not magic, and it is not that effort never matters. It is that so much of your striving was actually interference, the ego thrashing so loudly that it drowned out the quieter, deeper intelligence that was always trying to guide you. When the thrashing finally stops, that deeper current can at last be felt, and it turns out to have been moving toward your good all along, waiting only for you to stop fighting it. This is what people are really describing when they talk about surrender. Though the word is so often misunderstood, surrender is not giving up. It is not passivity or defeat. It is the ego finally trusting that it is not alone, that it does not have to manufacture your entire life through force, that there is a deeper wisdom in you that has been steering the whole time and can be trusted to keep steering. It is the exhausted, white-knuckled driver finally letting a more experienced hand take the wheel and discovering, with astonishment, that the car does not crash, that it begins, in fact, to move more smoothly than it ever did under the driver's frantic control. The relief of that moment is profound, because a burden you were never actually meant to carry alone finally slips off your shoulders. So when you feel the grip beginning to loosen, do not panic, and do not read it as giving up on your life. The loosening is not the end of your agency. It is the beginning of a truer kind of agency, one that works with the deep current of your becoming instead of thrashing against it. When you notice that you are able, finally, to release an outcome you have been strangling, to stop forcing, to trust that something is holding you even when you cannot see it, that is the seventh sign, and it is the doorway to everything. Because it is only when the ego stops driving that you can finally be carried to the place you could never have forced your way to. There is an image that captures exactly why this surrender works, and why it feels so counterintuitive. Anyone who has been taught water rescue knows that a drowning person is dangerous, because in their panic they thrash and fight, and grab and pull both themselves and their rescuer under. The very frantic effort to survive is what drowns them. And the first thing you learn is that a person has to stop fighting the water before they can be saved, because the water will hold a still body afloat, but it cannot hold a thrashing one. The panic, the desperate effort, the refusal to stop struggling is the thing that sinks them. Only when they finally still themselves can the water do what it was always able to do, which is carry them. So much of our striving in these seasons is exactly that kind of thrashing. We are so terrified of going under that we fight the very current that would have carried us, and our panic exhausts us and pulls us down. This is why the turning point so often comes at what people call rock bottom, the moment when a person is finally too exhausted to fight anymore, and simply lets go, and discovers, to their astonishment, that they do not sink, that something holds them, that the letting go they were so afraid of turns out to be the beginning of being carried. Jung understood that this exhaustion, painful as it is often a gift in disguise, because it accomplishes what no amount of insight could. It finally makes the ego stop thrashing, and in the stillness that follows, the deeper self can at last take hold. You do not have to reach total collapse to learn this, but you do have to learn, somehow, to stop fighting the water. And when you arrive there, you encounter the eighth and final sign, the one that makes sense of every strange thing that came before. The moment you turn around, look back, and watch it all connect. The eighth sign is the one that redeems all the others, and it can only happen in retrospect. One day you turn around, look back over the whole confusing journey, and watch, with something like awe, as every scattered piece connects. It usually arrives quietly, on an ordinary day. You are not looking for it, and then some small thing prompts you to glance back over the road you have traveled, and suddenly you see it, the pattern that was invisible while you were living it. The door that closed and broke your heart turns out to have been the exact thing that pushed you toward the path that led here. The delay you cursed turns out to have been the time you needed to become ready. The relationship that ended, the plan that collapsed, the detour that made no sense, the painful season you would have done anything to escape, all of it, seen from here, arranges itself into a line that leads precisely to where you are now standing. What felt, moment by moment, like chaos, reveals itself, looking back, to have been a hidden order all along. Carl Jung believed this retrospective clarity was one of the most profound experiences available to a human being, and he understood why it can only come at the end. While you are inside your life, moving forward through time, you can only ever see the underside of the pattern, the tangle of loose threads and knots and cut ends that makes no sense up close. It is only when you can finally look back over the whole woven length of it that the picture on the other side becomes visible, and you realize that what looked like a random tangle from underneath was, From above, a design. The meaning was always there. You simply could not see it from inside the weaving. You had to travel far enough to turn around and look. There is an old image for this that captures it perfectly. A tapestry, seen from behind while it is being made, looks like chaos. A mess of knotted threads, colors crossing at random, loose ends hanging everywhere. No discernible picture at all. Anyone looking only at the back would swear the weaver had no plan. But turn the tapestry around, and there on the front is an image of extraordinary coherence. Every single one of those chaotic threads, including the dark ones, the broken ones, the ones that seemed like mistakes, playing its exact necessary part in the whole. For most of your life you have been looking at the back of the tapestry. The eighth sign is the moment you are finally shown the front. And understand that nothing was wasted, nothing was random, and even the darkest threads were part of the design. And this is what Jung meant by arriving at the self, by the long journey of individuation reaching its quiet destination. It is not that you finally get everything you were chasing. It is that you become whole enough and see clearly enough to recognize that the whole journey, including everything that felt like failure and delay and loss, was quietly assembling the person you now are. You take your place, at last, at the center of your own life, no longer a victim of a chaos you could not understand, but a participant in an unfolding you can finally see the shape of. You stop asking why your path did not look like everyone else's, because you understand, now, that it was carrying you somewhere their paths never could. The confusion was never the opposite of the meaning. The confusion was the meaning, still hidden, doing its work in the dark until you were ready to see it whole. So if you cannot yet see how any of it connects, if you are still inside the tangle, still looking at the chaotic back of the weaving, let this be the thing you carry out of here tonight. The pattern is there. You simply cannot see it yet from where you are standing, because you are still inside the making of it. But the day is coming, and it may be closer than you think, when you will turn around and see the front of the tapestry of your own life, and understand that everything, even this strange and difficult season you are living through right now, was quietly bringing you home. There is one more image worth holding here, because it speaks to the deepest fear underneath this whole passage, the fear that your life has wandered so far off course it can never find its way. Think of a river making its way to the sea. From close up, the river's path looks senseless. It bends back on itself. It slows into wide, still pools that seem to go nowhere. It gets diverted around mountains, forced into long detours that carry it, for a while, in what looks like entirely the wrong direction. If the river had a mind, and could only see the stretch it was in, it would despair at every bend, certain it had lost its way, sure that the mountain in its path had ruined everything. But the river does not need to see the whole route. Every bend, every delay, every forced detour, even the ones that carried it backward for a time, is part of how it finds the lowest ground, and the lowest ground always leads to the sea. Not one river in the history of the world has failed to reach it. The detours were never evidence it was lost. The detours were the path. Your life has been finding its way to the sea the same way, through bends and pools and long detours that made no sense from inside them. And the eighth sign, the moment of looking back and understanding, is simply the moment you rise high enough to see that the whole winding course was always flowing in one direction, toward the place you most deeply belong. You did not need to see the whole route while you were traveling it. You only needed to keep going, to not dam yourself up in despair at some bend that frightened you. The sea was always ahead. It still is. And every strange turn that scared you along the way was quietly carrying you toward it. That is the eighth sign. And it is the promise underneath all the others, the reason you can trust, even in the confusion, that everything is about to come together for you. So, what do you actually do while you are still inside this, before the pattern reveals itself, before the pieces have visibly come together? Because it is one thing to be told that everything is quietly working out, and quite another to live through the emptiness and the silence and the waiting without losing your faith that it is true. Let me offer you a few things to hold on to, drawn from everything we have walked through tonight. The first is simply this: stop trying to force the timing. Almost all the suffering in these seasons comes not from the season itself, but from our frantic insistence that it should already be over, that the answer should have come by now, that we should already be on the other side. We lie awake demanding that life show us the whole plan immediately, and when it will not, we take the not knowing as proof that nothing good is coming. But Carl Jung understood that the deep work of becoming has its own timing, and that timing cannot be rushed any more than you can rush a season or hurry a sunrise. Your only task is not to force the arrival, but to stop abandoning yourself before it comes. When the urge rises to declare it hopeless, to give up, to conclude that you have been forgotten, recognize that urge as the single most dangerous thing in the whole passage, because it is what makes people quit in the last hour before the dawn. Do not quit in the dark. The dark is not the end of the story. It is the chapter right before the turn. The second thing is to change the question you are asking. When you are suffering through one of these seasons, the question that runs constantly through the mind is, when will this be over? But that question keeps you fixed on the pain and blind to its purpose, and it has no answer that will satisfy you. Jung would have you ask a different question entirely. Not when will this end, but who am I becoming through this? What is being built in me right now, in the dark, that could not have been built any other way? What strength is this emptiness growing? What truer self is this silence preparing? The moment you shift from the first question to the second, something changes inside you. You stop being purely a victim of the season and become, quietly, a participant in it. You begin to cooperate with your own becoming instead of only enduring it. And the same difficult days start to feel less like punishment and more like labor. The hard and holy labor of bringing a new self to birth. The third thing is to trust the process even when you cannot see it. And here it helps to remember the images we have walked through. Remember the tree standing bare in winter, doing its most important work underground exactly when it looks most lifeless. Remember the slow seed sending its roots deep, while the fast one races to bloom and fade. Remember the tapestry, chaotic and senseless from behind, coherent and beautiful from the front. And remember that you are simply still looking at the back of yours. When the fear rises that nothing is happening, that you are simply stuck, that the emptiness is permanent, return to these images and let them remind you of what you cannot presently see. Something is happening. It is happening precisely in the place you cannot look, at the roots, underneath the surface, on the other side of the weaving. The absence of visible progress is not the absence of progress. In these deep seasons, the most important growth is nearly always the kind that cannot be seen while it is happening. And the fourth thing, the one that holds all the others, is to be gentle with yourself while you wait. You are not failing because this is hard. You are not weak because you are struggling. You are a human being going through one of the most demanding and sacred passages a human being can go through. The death of an old self and the slow birth of a truer one. And that passage has broken the composure of the strongest people who ever lived. Give yourself the tenderness you would give someone you loved who was going through exactly this. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to a dear friend standing where you stand. The harshness you turn on yourself in these seasons does not speed the process. It only adds a second, unnecessary suffering on top of the first. Let it go, as much as you can. Be on your own side. You are doing something quietly heroic simply by continuing, simply by not abandoning yourself in the dark, and that is enough. That is more than enough. And there is one more practice, perhaps the most quietly powerful of all. Look back at your own life for evidence, because you almost certainly already have it. You have lived long enough to have been through at least one season that felt, at the time, like pure disaster. and that you can now see, from here, was the doorway to something good. A job you lost that freed you for a better one. A relationship that ended and broke you, that you now thank God ended. A plan that collapsed and made room for the thing you could not have planned. Go back and find those moments in your own history, deliberately, and look at them closely, because they are your proof. They are the times the pattern already revealed itself to you. The times you already lived through a falling apart that turned out to be a coming together. If it has happened before in your life, even once, then it is not a fantasy or a hope. It is something you have already witnessed with your own eyes. And that means it can be trusted to be happening again now, in this season, underneath the part you cannot yet see. Your own past is the most convincing argument you will ever have that the confusion you are in right now is not the end of the story. Keep that evidence close, and return to it when the fear tells you that this time is different, that this time there is no hidden order, that this time you really have simply been abandoned. The fear always says that, and your own history, again and again, has proven it wrong. Let what you have already lived through become the ground you stand on while you wait for what you cannot yet see. So if you have recognized yourself somewhere in these 8 signs tonight, let this be what stays with you after the video ends. The emptiness you feel, the sense of arriving too late, the strange coincidences, the cruel silence, the parts of yourself you were ashamed of, the fear, the exhaustion of trying to control it all, the confusion you cannot yet make sense of. None of it is proof that your life is falling apart. Seen from deep enough, from the place where Carl Jung spent his life looking, all of it may be the quiet, hidden evidence that your life is finally coming together. You do not have to force it. You could not force it if you tried. This kind of becoming moves at the pace of roots and seasons, underground, in the dark, the way the most important things always grow. Your task is not to make it happen faster. Your task is to stay, to not turn back, to be gentle with yourself in the waiting, and to trust that the confusion you are living through is not the absence of a plan, but a plan you cannot yet see the shape of. The pieces are moving toward each other even now, even tonight, even in the parts of your life that feel most stuck and most silent. You simply cannot see them connecting yet, because you are still inside the connecting. And one day, and it may be sooner than you dare to believe, you are going to turn around and look back at exactly this season, the one that is frightening you now, and you are going to understand what it was for. You will see how the closed door protected you from a life that was never yours. You will see how the delay was not life forgetting you, but life preparing you, growing in you the depth and the strength that the coming chapter would require. You will see how even the cruel silence and the aching emptiness were quietly shaping you into someone finally able to hold the life that was on its way. The very things you are begging to be delivered from tonight are, some of them, the exact things that are getting you ready. And when you can finally see that, the fear loosens, and something like peace, and even gratitude, quietly takes its place. And you may find, to your surprise, that you feel something like gratitude for this hard chapter, because you will finally see that it was never going in the wrong direction at all. It was bringing you, the whole time, exactly to where you needed to be. There is an old truth that Carl Jung pointed to again and again, in one form or another, across all his work, that a person does not become whole by adding something they lack, but by gathering back the pieces of themselves they had scattered and disowned along the way. Everything you need for the life that is coming is already in you. It is not out there somewhere, waiting to be acquired. It is in here. Some of it buried in the emptiness, some of it hidden in the shadow, some of it locked behind your fears, some of it waiting in the parts of your story you have not yet been able to understand. This whole strange passage, with all its confusion and silence and ache, is not taking things away from you. It is gathering you back to yourself, piece by piece, until you are whole enough to hold what is coming. Nothing real is being lost here. Something is being assembled. So the next time the fear rises and tells you that your life is falling apart, try, gently, to answer it with the truth. It is not falling apart. It is falling together in a way you cannot yet see, at a depth you cannot yet reach. The pieces are finding each other in the dark, and you do not have to make that happen, or force it, or even understand it. You only have to stay and be kind to yourself, and trust the quiet work that is already underway beneath the surface of this difficult season. So if this reached something real in you tonight, and you needed to hear that it is all still coming together, leave one word in the comments below for where you are right now. It might be empty. It might be waiting. It might be tired. It might be hopeful. Whatever is truest for you tonight. Because there are far more of us walking through this quiet, confusing passage than any of us realize. Each one convinced we are the only one who has lost the way. You are not lost, and you are not alone. And if you want to keep walking through this with us, stay close. Subscribe, and let this be a place you return to whenever the confusion gets heavy and you need reminding of what is happening underneath it. This is a channel for exactly this, the slow, sacred, often difficult work of becoming who you truly are and trusting the process even in the parts you cannot yet understand. Be gentle with yourself tonight, and gentle with the faithful, frightened person you have been through all of this. Trust that everything is quietly coming together, even the parts that still ache, even the parts you cannot yet understand. And whenever the confusion gets heavy and the old fear comes back to tell you that you have been forgotten, come back and sit here again, and let this be the place that reminds you what is really happening underneath it all. I will see you in the next video.